All right, guys. This is it. I have to be done with this day of coding. I can't believe it's already almost been 24 hours. But I guess that's just what happens when you travel to Tokyo and you can't sleep. But here we are. This is the fifth tutorial out of this series about building a chatbot. And really, I lied. This is not about building a chatbot. This tutorial series is about performing automation in Domo that uses generative AI. And I want to pause for a moment and remind us that, like, when you talk about automation with AI, like doing something useful other than like just having a chatbot or having something creative, there's this boundary between magic of generating generative AI of generating text, and then what do you actually do with that output? And I think sometimes when we talk about AI, we're like, oh, it's this mythical silver bullet panacea. I don't know what these words means, but it's just like going to solve problems for us. It's not. There's still stuff that you have to manually define what to do with the result of this AI. And so that's why I'm taking time on this right now, and I'm going to try to differentiate as we step through this code what is being handled by an LLM and what is a manually defined process that we have to um, define so that it can work repeatedly over and over again. The gist of it is, as we said in previous tutorials, we were really excited about being able to generate a description for what this AI does. And generating the description is the magic. Having it appear in the ETL, in the descriptive field, the description field, that's not magic. So let's step through that. All right, so we're going to work on data flow ID number 12. So that's my first parameter here. First thing I need is an auth object that will allow me to authenticate against Domo. I did rewrite a lot of the script that we've looked at before into a format that's more in alignment with how how do I say this? Generate automation for real customers. This is like how I actually write code, minus the fact that some of this code is synchronous as opposed to asynchronous. So my first step is going to be to get the data flow descriptive data. And I might describe this as extract data from the data flow definition that might be useful in producing a description of that data flow. And if you're not good at scripting, or if you're new to this process, and hell, I probably should have done it too, it might be good to say, hey, I have this automation. This is what I want to end, where I want to end up. What are the steps necessary to get there? And so the first thing we might want to do when I want to generate a description is say, hey, what information is useful for generating that description? In our case, just thinking it through, we were like, oh, well, the pieces of information we want are the name of the data flow, the description if it already exists, and the actions that we do in the data flow. All that information can be retrieved from the get data flow by ID API. I'm just going to add a quick return raw so that we can see what that looks like. So I'll say if return raw, return response, so we can just really quickly test that. I'm going to add return raw equals true. Okay, so what comes back from get data flow by ID is an instance of response get data, which, if you'll recall, is the entire definition of the data flow, including, again, name, description, and the actions. But what I actually only care about is the stuff that I said earlier was important for processing my processing my data flow definition, which I defined under models, data flow model. I said the stuff of interest is the data flow ID, the name, and the actions. And I added in here, if there's a description and autogen is not in the description, then I'm going to include the description as stuff that's of interest. I.e., if you typed out something by hand in your description field, that's probably useful for the description. But if autogen is contained, then I'm assuming that LLM generated the description. I'm not going to use that because I don't want to use generated content in generated content because that creates inception. Don't want inception. In fact, I added the ability to raise an error that says if there is a description and autogen is in the description, I want to raise an exception that says the dataflow ID description was already auto-generated. So I'll raise an error to kind of short circuit and not replace what already exists because somebody probably typed this in by hand. This is a decision that I'm making as part of the implementation of my automation. And I'm trying to differentiate between like, what is API stuff? That's API stuff. What's LLM stuff that's unique to the LLM? And what is coming from Jay as part of the way he chose to implement this? In fact, as I say that out loud, this should be removed. Okay. Because this is logic unique to Jay and his implementation. Your implementation doesn't need to know about autogen because maybe you use it, maybe you don't. Who knows? Cool. So let me run this again. Cool. I'm going to say return val is equal to false, fast, false. Okay, so now we just have the stuff that the data flow thinks is important for generating the description of my data flow. Kind of side note, if you'll recall under prompts, this is the prompt that we used to say, how do you take that JSON definition of actions and describe it? If I wanted to, this would be a great place to say, hey, here's a sample prompt, here's a good description. Here's another sample prompt, here's another good description. Sorry, I said sample prompt. Here is another like body like this. Here's a good description. Because some of this stuff that comes out of the description, maybe I want to know that I'm using replace. Maybe I want to mention that I'm not using partitioned. But my LLM only has that context if I program it or design it into the instructions that I give it. Okay, let's set that aside. Here, I'm going to describe my data flow, give it descriptive data, pass that descriptive data into my describe data flow LLM, and then return some responses. Arguably, as I'm rewriting this like 3 times by now, as I've rewritten this a couple times, my LLM describe data flow, I actually don't need that. I actually don't need a special function for invoking the LLM because the only thing that changed is that I gave it a way of passing in messages, which I arguably don't need, so I'm going to take this out. I'm going to take this out, and I'm just going to use invoke message to describe my data flow. And then I just have to make sure that I pass in messages. And remember, messages is that what it is? Generate LLM messages. Make sure that I grab the right one. Okay. I think this will work. Comma. So in messages, I invoke my endpoint, I get a response, I can return raw. What I really want though is I want to generate my new description and I want to add that timestamp at the end that says, hey, I did this at 5:01. And so that generate new description is just a really cheeky function that says, give me my description back from the LLM, and then just add that string onto the end of it so that I know that this was generated as part of a J. Wilson process. Cool. So now I have my descriptive string. All I have to do now is just update my data flow definition with the new description. In order to update the data flow by ID, we're no longer in LLM land. We're no longer using generative AI. We're just using like pure, actually I could do this through the Domo user interface, right? Go to my data flow, generate the update body, and then write it to the, or put it to the data flow, um, the data flow API. So I could call, do I have all of the pieces? Do I have a new description? I do. Okay. So I could call update data flow ID is equal to data flow ID, auth is equal to auth, description, new description is equal to data flow description. And for now, we'll just show you what we're calling, right? We're not calling the LLM. We're calling the data flows API, which is basically what you do when you define a data flow here in edit. When you push save, you're functionally doing the same thing as modifying. You're functionally doing the same thing as calling the put API. So right now I'm just going to remove the description so that we can see that there is no description. Then I'm going to call this put API, passing in the new description. I'll refresh and we'll see the description has now been updated with the results from my LLM. Right? So this, again, it's that intersection between I did a little magic with generative AI and then I used it by updating an API in a normal, consistent way. And you know what's kind of cool? We could do this over every API, sorry, every data flow in my Domo instance. But before we do that, what I would really do is I have a ton of mini functions for processing a data flow. Let me stitch them all together. So I like to have a little debug step that allows me to say, hey, I'm starting data flow x of x. First thing I need to do is I need to get my descriptive data. Then I need to send those actions to my LLM. Then I need to update my data flow with the new description. So let me just call that really quick on 12. The description has already been auto-generated. Let me remove the description. Let's run it again so it doesn't throw our error. Okay. And then if it worked properly, there's my description again. Cool. The last thing to do is to automate this at scale. And all we mean by automate this at scale is we mean apply this to every data flow in the data center. So how can I do that? Well, first I have to get a list of every data flow. I've done this in other tutorial videos, but I would get a list of every data flow in the data center. And then for each data flow ID, apply the function process data flow. And if you have to have 1, 20, or 40 instances you're managing, wouldn't it be cool if you could map over each Domo instance, go to each Domo instance, get every single data flow, apply this transformation, and now all of a sudden, you're a hero. But again, the only part that was magic was querying my LLM with a bunch of actions. The rest of it is just good old-fashioned write some code. And as I say, not all of it's magic. What if I didn't have a function called search data center? Let me delete this guy. And I'm going to make a new file. What if you didn't have a function called search data center? Well, how could you get it? Well, I might say, let me monitor network traffic because that's the good old standby. And I might say, how do I query my net data center? Okay, this is the URL I need, right? Okay. Do I have code that can program for me? Did I not create a prompt called python developer.txt? What is python developer.txt? You are a Python developer skilled at translating URLs into root functions. Root functions just follow a specific format. If you'll recall, I wrote a, what is it called? A prompt. I gave it some examples of Jay Wilson's handwriting. How does Jay want functions to be written? This way. So now I can go into my programmer and I can say, okay, you know how Jay Wilson likes to have his code written. So why don't we write a function that posts a query to this endpoint, and the endpoint should receive a query body of type dictionary that includes the query parameters. That's basically, okay, so write a function that posts to this endpoint and uses this format. And then generate a function that uses Jay Wilson's handwriting. So what do we get back? We get this back. Guys, could you imagine if Domo just handed me like a Postman library of all of their functions? How quickly I could generate 1,000,001 Python functions that pretty much would make PyDomo superfluous. It already exists in the form of Domo library, but I'm just saying, like, we can do some really cool stuff with generative AI, but we don't want magic. How do I turn this into a function that I can use over and over again? I need to take my last message and I need to write it to disk. So I have a utility function that I defined in my previous tutorial called update function in file. It's going to write to the file called data center, and if you'll recall, I just deleted it, so there's nothing in here. And it's going to write to the function that is called, what is this function called? Post search query. You're probably wondering why the name of the function changed from one, like my prep for this versus the one that I got back from the API just now. The reason why the results change from the LLM is, remember, the LLM does not perform, well, it does perform magic, it doesn't. It does math. It guesses, what do I think Jay would want his function called given the input I was previously given, right? What is the context I was previously provided? What is the message that Jay sent? What day of the week is it? What math determines how I get a function? And there's no way we're going to get the same answer twice. That's why we call it magic, right? That's why it's the generative in the generative AI. But that's also why I can't just trust an LLM to do the right thing. I have to take this result, I have to write it to disk, I have to pull I have to pull up the file and I have to say, okay, is this actually good? Is this something I can git commit and use in my professional code? Professional, he says. I know that I want it called Search Data Center, so let me rename that. Okay, I can see here we're missing some imports. Let me grab some imports real quick. I need DMDE, I need client response get data, I need Domo auth. Okay, so what is your response? You're going to return an instance of rgd.response get data. Cool. This is spelled correctly. We are going to do post request passing in query body, which is of type dictionary, and then we return a response. Okay, good. This is all good. All right, come back to my bot. So these this query body I lifted out of here, out of my out of the browser, and then I deleted stuff that I didn't need, like I don't need it to query to filter on B. I want all of Jay Wilson's queries. I will say this is only parsing the first, I guess, 30 of Jay's ETLs. But not only that, Jay might have 1,000 ETLs. So what I really, really need to do is I need to modify this function to do a loop to not just retrieve the first X results. I need it to return all the results. That's not written into this code here, but that's another problem for a different day. Let me just call search data center. I get response, my response object. And of the response object, the actual, where is the search? The actual data flows are here under search objects. So I need res.response.search objects. And then I can say for each, okay, we're not doing a list comprehension, for each index and object in enumerate this list. Let's just print the object, which would be, and we want the database ID. Okay, so this is a list of all of my data flows that came back in the first 30. And then for each of these data flows, I need to call process data flow. Okay, so I'm going to write a main function because I like wrapping everything in a cute little main. So I'll say define a function called main where we receive an auth object. Here's my query body. Where are the end of my filters? The end of my filters are here. Okay. Give me some good formatting, please. Weird. Okay, here's my query body. I'm going to send that query body into my search data center. Instead of calling it DMDC, I'm going to call it data center roots, just to keep the same formatting as everywhere else. So search data center roots, passing in auth. I'll say debug API is a parameter here. And then I can say for each search object in the search objects, I can now call process data flow, passing in object database ID, auth is equal to auth. Index is coming off of enumerate, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one? Just so I can get to debug PRN. Let me do debug PRN is equal to true. No. Okay. have a good main function. So now I can call main passing in auth equals auth and debug prn equals true, debug API equals false. Length accepts no keyword arguments. Oh, I need to close parens right there. So data 227 already has a description, description. We're still running. Forbidden, that's fun. What happened on 86? What happened on dataflow 86? Dataflow has been disabled. Okay, that's fun. We are on 28 out of 29. We're going to be done soon. Do I have a return? Nope, I do not have a return. Okay, so we're already done. So theoretically, I should be able to go into data flows. I should be able to see all my data flows, what happens in Adrenaline. Ha! It worked. I don't know. I'm surprised. So, like, guys, that's it. Um, I I hope you learned some good stuff. I hope you're getting this feel for like what part of an automation is quote unquote magic, i.e., leveraging generative AI, and which part of an automation still requires me to use good old fashioned code. Now, that's not to say I can't use automation. Sorry, it's not to say I can't use generative AI to generate code, right? We saw here that I wrote a function in the previous tutorial to like do regex, which I'm terrible at. I'm terrible at regex, but LLMs are great at regex. All I have to do once that regex gets generated, though, is I still have to go back into utils and make sure that it's doing common sense things. If in the previous tutorial, I had two versions of this function, and one version was using split to find the start and end of the function name, and the other one was using regex. And it's like not one's not better or worse than the other, but there still is this requirement that when you're using LLM, you have to make sure it's doing common sense things or build in a series of checks and balances into a user interface so that a user can interact with the output of an LLM. And John, if you're watching this, that's why we need Streamlit. Can we have Streamlit in Domo? That would be amazing. Just saying. Anyway, guys, I hope you found this useful. I'm going to go ahead and add this to GitHub. I'm going to push it up to Domo. Collab is the name of the repo. Just look in the description. If you like this, please leave a comment. It really puts wins in my sail in terms of like making me want to make more content like this and spending a whole day on stuff like this. And maybe we can talk Domo into letting me talk on at Domopalooza, present this at Domopalooza. Anyway, hope you guys liked it. Catch you guys later. Bye.